Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief2Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey there, welcome to Grief2Growth. I'm your host, Brian Smith. And whether you're tuning in for the very first time or you've been walking this journey with me for a while, I am really glad that you're here. On this podcast, we dive deep into life's most difficult questions: who we are, why we're here, where we come from, where we're going when we leave this life. My goal is always to provide tools, to provide stories and conversations to help us to grow through grief, and not just to survive, but to thrive. Today's guest is someone who embodies the very heart of what Grief2Growth is all about. Melissa Hull is a mother. She's a best-selling author. She's an international speaker, a media host, a master coach, and she's the CEO of Melissa Hull Worldwide. Her journey began with the devastating loss, the accidental drowning of her young son, Drew. But rather than letting grief define her, Melissa made the courageous choice to transform her pain into purpose. Her new book is called Dear Drew, Creating a Life Bigger Than Grief. It releases actually today, so I'm honored to have her here on the day of her launch. And it's already being called a must-read for anyone who's navigating loss and searching for light. In our conversation, we're going to talk about how grief can live alongside joy and how we can choose resilience, healing, and even joy without erasing our pain. Melissa will share insights on how to integrate grief into our lives rather than letting it become our entire story. We'll talk about the importance of intentional healing, mindfulness practices to help us to rebuild, and how honest conversations about grief can truly save our lives. So if you've ever wondered how to coexist with love and loss, or how to honor your past while creating a future full of hope, you're going to want to stay with us through the end of this powerful episode. And after the conversation is over, join me on my Substack at grief2growth.substack.com to continue the conversation. And with that, I'd like to welcome Melissa Hull.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yeah, and thanks for doing this on the day of your book launch. I know it's a big day when you go through the process. I think you told me it's like a 5-year process to get to this point.
It's a 5 year. I started writing the manuscript in 2020, and today it's, August 19th, 2025, and today is the publishing date. So it was a 5 year journey.
Well, I know it's a big thing to get the book launched. So again, thanks for being here today. Before we get into all the topics we're going to talk about, first tell me about your son, Drew.
Thank you for asking. Drew is my firstborn child. When the accident occurred, he was 4.5 years old. I was the mother of two young boys, Drew 4.5, Devin, his brother, was 3. And like most moms, I was just, a busy mom. Two little boys that close in age, that's a lot of energy. And so I was
Yeah.
constantly, focusing on my children and, my family. And Drew was the kind of adventurous little spirit that would wake up before the sun. He was just so exuberant to wake up every day and to begin, just having fun. He loved to play. He loved to be outside. And on this particular morning, I was exhausted because his younger brother has asthma. And as a toddler, we would be doing breathing treatments quite frequently, especially at certain times of the year when there are more, pollen in the air, more things to trigger his asthma attacks. And so I had been up giving Devin breathing treatments most of that night. My husband was away on business, so it was just me with the boys. And Drew woke up and he came into the room, and I remember he was so excited. It was about 4:55 in the morning, and
Mhm.
he said, "Mama, Mama, the sun is coming up." And that was the rule. That was the rule. He could not get out of bed until the sun was coming up. And so he had me on a technicality. I'm like, okay, you're right, Drew. The sun is coming up. I'm so tired, but I'm gonna get up. And I got up with him, and he was very specific about his breakfast. He wanted beef raviolis and not what I, it was either that or Rocky Road ice cream. And so we went with beef raviolis that morning. So it just seemed like the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
So I got him his breakfast, and he loved Thomas the Tank Engine. And so I put on his video. I gave him some paper and some crayons, and I said, "Sweetheart, sit here, eat your breakfast. I'm going to go back and check on your brother."
Hmm.
And I went back into my bedroom where Devin was, wheezing pretty heavily. And after an exhaustive night, I laid beside him and I was patting his back just to keep him soothed so he would fall asleep because he was exhausted.
Hmm.
And in so doing that, I inadvertently fell asleep. And when I woke up, the house was very quiet, which was never the norm when Drew was, up and awake.
Hmm.
So I was immediately somewhat concerned, and I started to go through the house, calling for him. He's not responding, looking for him, in all the usual hiding places, and he's not there. And then I noticed that my back door was open just ever so slightly, maybe about an inch to 2 inches. And I thought, okay, he's outside. So I go outside and I'm looking for him, and he's not in the backyard. And this is when I start to get that fear in the center of my gut,
Hmm.
where I knew something was not right. And as my panic grew, I ran back into the house, calling for him, not responding, ran back outside, and all of a sudden I noticed that my dogs, who we had about four dogs, that were outside as well, and they started running toward me, and they were wet. And I thought, what on earth? We don't have a pool. And then I thought, oh my God, the irrigation canal. And
Hmm.
so I ran towards a very large irrigation canal. And in my community, it's very much agricultural. And so we have large irrigation systems and waterways to transport water to the fields. And there was one very large canal, just maybe 200 feet, no yards, 200 yards from the house. And then I saw my son's footprints leading towards that irrigation canal. So I ran as fast as I could to it. And when I arrived at the canal, I could see that there was a splash on the side of it. And I noticed that the dirt above this canal bank had given way. And I saw all of my dog's paw prints and Drew's footprints. And I knew he had fallen in.
Hmm.
And I dropped to my knees and I remember begging God to please not let this be the outcome.
Yeah.
Please, please spare my son, help me find him. At this point, there was a person driving by. They stopped. I begged them to call the authorities, and they did. I explained I have a little boy at home. I needed to go back. I started to call my family, my husband who was away on business, and let them know that Drew is missing. And within 7 hours of those initial moments, they came to my home where I was sitting with my family, and they told me that they had found his body and that he had in fact drowned that morning. And that is how the accident occurred, and that is the moment that radically and forever changed my life. That perfect morning, those beautiful moments that I spent with my son, like every other morning,
Yeah.
I was sitting in the realization that that was the last time I would ever have that with him again. And it devastated me. And I just remember thinking, I don't know how I can survive this.
Mm, I'm so sorry. That moment that you realize that your life is never going to be the same again. That and everything for me anyway is defined by before and after that. I always think about like, was this before or was this after?
Yeah, I very much, I very much lived like that for quite some time, and until I made the decision that I wasn't going to leave Drew in the past, that Drew was coming
Mm-hmm.
forward with me, and so
Mm-hmm.
now it's a different after, but it's not the same kind of painful separation that it was at that particular moment.
Yeah, let's talk about that shift of because
Sure.
there people tell you to, you have to move on. And I remember that term just irritated me when people would say
Yeah,
that after. Yeah.
yeah, I'll go a step further. It pissed me off. Like it
Yeah.
made me mad. It made me feel that somehow they were telling me that my pain was unwelcomed and that my emotions and my longing, my mourning for my son was somehow something that needed to be hurried up
Hmm.
and just processed through without really understanding that that's impossible. There is no leaving him behind. There is no getting over this. But there was a pathway to bring him with me that felt much more aligned with the truth, which is I never wanted to leave him in the past. I never wanted to leave him behind. And so I just decided uh, I'm going to do this my way.
Hmm.
I'm gonna grieve my way. I'm not going to let people tell me how I should be reacting or what is appropriate or what is even, I guess, healthy. I allowed myself to feel everything and I welcomed those feelings because anytime that I tried to stifle them or minimize them, I noticed how much pain I was in. I
Hmm.
could not live with that. I could not live like that. And so I just decided that the old model wasn't for me.
Yeah. So how did you make that shift? Was it just something inside of you that said, I'm just going to do it my way, or did you have some assistance or resources?
You know, I did have assistance in resources, but I also was very curious and I explored. I explored very like in the non-traditional realms. I've tried everything. I talked to mediums and psychics. I went to very spiritual locations in Sedona, Arizona, where they
Mm-hmm.
talk about the vortex and they talk about. I went everywhere. I studied aura personalities. I studied pranic healing. I studied Reiki and became a Reiki master. I studied the chakra systems. I really dove into alternative health, and that led me into kind of a spiritual awakening. I
Hmm.
started to then read different books. The Alchemist, The Fifth Mountain, which is also written by Pablo Coelho, was a transformational book for me. Um, and I just allowed myself to explore my grief by staying curious about what would help align me with this idea that I still wanted to live a life of beauty and joy and vibrancy and do that alongside of my mourning and the pain that comes with mourning your child.
Hmm.
It is not, there's no way to separate that from this experience. But what I have discovered is that love will always outlast life. And when I held on to the love that we
Hmm.
shared in those moments,
Yeah.
when I went back and I listened to my heart and I would recall these very beautiful moments, these memories. I realized that was how I could bring him forward. I would talk about him. I would talk about how I felt inside of this process. And I just started writing. I
Mm.
started writing. I used painting, art therapy as a way for me to process my grief. But writing really became the vehicle that felt like I was helping myself and also staying very connected to my son, which made me feel good. I felt grateful that
Yeah.
I had those beautiful memories, and he felt closer to me.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I was just listening to there's a guy named Dr. Parasetti, and I actually after my daughter passed away, I found his program from the Family Foundation. This was like 9 years ago. I found his program. My daughter passed 10 years ago, and he was talking about the old model of grief that Freud brought up was like grief is a disease basically. It's a disorder. You have to get rid of it. You've got to accept the fact that they're gone. You move on, let them go. All those types of things, and that just doesn't work.
No.
So it's good that you discovered that. And same way kind of I do is like I'm bringing her with me. I can't leave her in the past.
And why would anybody want to? They're a part, they're a part of our legacy. They're,
Yeah.
even though their lives may not have continued, their love and their presence can. And I think it's a decision that we make
Hmm.
as grievers. I know that I have seen people choose the opposite, where they kind of decide that nope, I have to set them aside and keep them in this, in this more tightly held kind of container where
Hmm.
I never wanted that. I wanted Drew to be sprinkled everywhere.
Yeah.
And so that's how I lived.
Yeah.
I brought him everywhere.
And Melissa, how many years has it been since his passing?
25.
Yeah. It's,
It was 25 years on May 19th of
yeah.
this year. So he passed May 19th, 2000.
Yeah. So that's the thing, they do have an impact on us, going forward for a very, very long time. And we can choose how we allow that to happen in our lives. And you chose a way that seemed, but it does stuff work for you. I'm curious, what were your beliefs before Drew's passing in terms of the afterlife, all the stuff you got into? Were you into that
Mhm.
before?
So I was brought up in the Mormon faith, and
Hmm.
my husband was brought up in the Seventh Day Adventist faith, and so we ended up at a Catholic church with our kids. Go figure.
Okay.
So we kind of we had a broad kind of acceptance of different religions,
Hmm.
but for us it was more about establishing faith in our family, the practice of faith. Um, we wanted our children to go to a particular school, and so we started attending the Catholic service.
Hmm.
And then Drew, ironically, decided that he wanted to try a different church that he heard about in his preschool class. He wanted to go to Sunday school with one of his friends, Nathaniel. And so we ended up at a non-denominational Christian church when the accident happened.
Hmm.
So I have kind of like a broad, you know, sampling of religious
Hmm.
background, but I've never been necessarily attached to a religious practice, but to very much a spiritual practice.
Hmm.
I've always felt very connected to God, if you will, or the universe, whatever feels more appropriate for your listeners. But I really felt a connection to the afterlife. I always have. And so I, I wasn't. None of this was foreign to me, but at the time of the accident, it really didn't feel like it was enough for me.
Hmm.
You know, all of and I understand why people say things like this, but he's now an angel in heaven, or this was God's plan. None of that landed well for me because, again, it felt like, well, all of that might be true. It still didn't alleviate the immensity of this pain that I felt. It was oppressive. I remember it had a physical presence. I could feel this pain in my body. It
Hmm.
was hard to breathe. I noticed that I would be pulling for my breath, like, or I'd hold my breath and then gasp because I didn't even realize I was holding my breath. Everything about life afterwards changed for me, even my breathing. And so my connection to God and these sentiments that people, these platitudes that people would give to me did not offset that at all. And so I was very concerned about what life would be like at that particular moment because I
Hmm.
did have I did have the knowledge. Trust me, I turned to the church, after the accident. I prayed ceaselessly
Hmm.
for God to help me carry this. And it didn't seem like nothing seemed to really be hitting that my heart in a way that it felt like it was lasting or meaningful until I received a letter from a woman I've never met. She's a mother that just heard about my story in my community, and she wrote me a letter. And she told me about her experience of losing her daughter to an accident when she made, it was early, they were getting ready for school. She left her little girl by the car. She had forgotten her purse, so she ran back in the house. And for whatever reason, her daughter had run into the road and was struck by a car. And she told me that she said, I know that the temptation to blame yourself for what you're going through is there. She's like, I know the should-haves, the could-haves, and the would-haves that are circulating in your mind and holding your heart kind of hostage. She said, I want to encourage you to remember this, that Joy and beauty can coexist alongside this pain, but you will have to choose to find it, and you will have to choose to find it every single day. That is the path towards, living life beyond this experience. And this is a few months after the accident.
Mm.
That letter and her words were the turning point for me.
Wow, that's amazing. You know, we
Yeah.
never know the power of the words that we speak to someone are going to have.
No, we don't, because we don't ever really. I don't know that we really think about it. I don't know that we really think about the impact that our words can have
Mhm.
until you're the recipient of words that change your life.
Yeah,
And that was that moment for me. And that's when I realized that the power of communication and the power of sharing our stories and being vulnerable was something that I wanted to also embrace. I wanted to serve and to make a difference if I could by talking about my experience in the most honest, real way, because that's what connected me to her story. That's
right.
what I think meant more to me than any one time when anyone said to me, he's an angel in heaven and God has him and this, was God's plan. Her words meant more to me than all of that. And you would think it would be the opposite, right? That
Right.
God's got him, he's in heaven, he's safe, he's loved, he's protected, and he'll be there waiting for me.
Hmm.
It was ineffective. But this idea or the story of another mother's tragic loss, and her honesty about the guilt, and her
Hmm.
honesty about the regret of making that decision to run into the house just for her keys. She needed the keys for her car, changed her life forever too. And
Hmm.
that was the one strand of hope that I needed because I was not doing well. I was
Right.
not sure that I could survive this. I was very much contemplating, not continuing. And it was very, very bleak. And so her words, I give her credit for saving my life because in that moment, that's what it felt like. It felt like I was given this absolute gift from a perfect stranger, and she remains a perfect stranger. I don't know who she is. She wrote a letter and signed her name, and it's just the craziest thing. But 25 years looking for her, I've never found her.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah. As you were saying that, and that honesty is so important because there are a couple of things I find that holds people back as we're going through our grief process. I mean, there's lots, but shame is one, guilt is one. So we feel like we're the only ones to have these feelings and we hold them in. And I had at a moment similar to yours. I remember I was a little bit after my daughter had passed, and I was on the road to see my other daughter. She was in college. My wife and I were listening to this podcast, and this woman said, after my daughter passed, I was standing on the street corner, getting ready to cross the street, and there was a bus coming along, and I thought about stepping out in front of that bus. And her saying that, I was like, wow, I've had those feelings too,
Yeah,
but I'd never heard anybody say it out loud before. So I
yeah.
rushed back and I got her book and I read her book, and that was one of the turning points for me. It was like these feelings that we have are very normal. Those feelings of not wanting to go on as a parent. You want to be with your child, even though you've got, a husband and another child here. So there's this tearing between two different worlds.
Absolutely. Um, that is when I realized that love will always outlast life, and
Hmm.
that if we allow it to become a gift is truly a gift. It Gratitude for the time that I had with Drew, even though it was just 4.5 years, was everything to me in the moments when he wasn't there.
Yeah.
I held on and I clung to those memories, and I cherished them in such a way that they sustained me.
Yeah.
They gave me the strength to endure what I didn't think was possible to endure. And in time, I started to see that this grief, this pain was the mirror reflection of the depth of our love and just how beautiful that in and of itself was, because at least it gave me a like this I guess reason or explanation for why it did hurt so bad,
Yeah.
why it was so hard, because it was that significant. He was that incredible, that special.
Right.
that vibrant. And so then all of a sudden, grief started to become like this, like, well, hell yes. Yes, this is really terrible because he was so incredible.
Hmm.
And his absence is hard. It's hard to become accustomed to that. But the memory of him is where I really started to find and discover that I never had to leave him behind. I always could bring him forward. And I let that be my truth. I just let it be my truth. And when people, and trust me, I'm still talking about him 25 years later.
Yeah.
25 years later, I had a lot of people say, "Isn't it time to like maybe talk about something else?"
Mhm.
And I thought, and I considered that, well, maybe. And then I thought, no, 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 it isn't. I'm
Right.
not going to put him on a shelf. I'm not going to accommodate everybody else's, level of comfort in order to make my grieving process fit them. I
Mhm.
need to do it this way. And I just, in a respectful way, um, in a mindful way, I always held true to that. That was my truth, and I was going to hold on to it. So I've been writing about grief and bereavement for over 10 years.
Mhm.
I've been speaking about grief and bereavement for about 8 years. And I've, now published my book, Dear
Mhm.
Drew, Creating a Life Bigger Than Grief. I feel like I'm just getting started
Yeah.
25 years later. And so
Yeah.
I've just come to understand that grief is something that we have to honor.
Yeah.
And that relationship is very personal. It's as unique as the person that we've lost. And we are the creators of what our journey with grief will look like. And so I chose to embrace it and to understand it and to make it a teacher and not this problem. It was not a problem that I could solve, but it is something that I could grow from.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about making that shift from,
Sure.
from what people are that are, oh, this is terrible, this has happened to me, which of course is true, to gratitude, for
Mhm.
to like my daughter's pictures. But we have an Apple TV, so our screensavers are pictures of our family. My wife loved looking at it because I tell her we had, even though we only had 15 years, we had a great 15 years.
Yeah.
But it takes a while to make that shift also. And you talked about, and I think it's important as we're having these conversations, sometimes people can go, oh, I just lost my son or daughter or husband or whatever. I'm never going to get there. But let's talk about the process that you went through because it's 25 years later.
Yeah. I will say I started with very nonverbal ways of kind of wrestling with my grief. I painted a lot
Mm,
and I used color and form to put onto a canvas what I couldn't put into a word. I could create the black void on a canvas and it could feel very tenebristic and chaotic, which is how I felt on the inside. I first gave permission for my emotions to just be felt and then to be seen on a canvas. That for me was very much a first step into processing all of the emotions, all of the thoughts, all of those ideas that I'll never recover. And I put it down on a canvas where I could see it. And it felt good to me to be able to do that. So I began there. And when that was one form. Another form of what I would say transition was when I gave myself permission for 15 minutes every day to only think about the good, to look at pictures of him where he's
mm,
smiling, where we're there together, and to remember all of the beauty that he brought to my life. And that is what really shifted my pain into a sense of gratitude was in the remembrance. What
that's
it was
powerful.
going back and reconnecting to those moments, knowing that I won't have them in the future, and crying. Oftentimes, I would be sobbing as I would look at these pictures, but I was also smiling. I
Hmm.
was smiling at the memory, and that was a very transformational practice for me. But it's something that I dedicated my time to every single day, and and if I needed to repeat it, if I had a particularly challenging day, I would repeat that process as often as I needed to in order to remind myself that there was also good here. There
Mm.
was also a life of amazing vibrancy here. And I never wanted to forget that. And that's what helped me make that transition when I didn't think that anything could help me. That's what ultimately did.
Yeah, it's very powerful. I've found, and for me, it's been 10 years, and it took me about 5 years to start to turn the corner on things. And people talk to me about gratitude, and I was like, "What are you talking about?
Yeah.
What do I have to be grateful for?" I think that's a natural reaction, but I love that practice that you have of looking at Drew and remembering how special he is and the impact that he had on your life, during those times that he was here. And again, that shift is kind of subtle. At first, you might cry a lot because you're thinking about what you don't have, but eventually you get to the point where you start thinking about we had great times together.
Oh, absolutely. And let me say this clearly. I am not trying to say that this was an easy process.
Yeah.
I struggled. I was, like I mentioned earlier, I was very, very suicidal. I did not know that I wanted to live after this. I felt completely responsible for the accident. I didn't think that I was worthy of
Mhm.
being Devin's mother. I felt like maybe I would mess it up and harm him inadvertently. I was very, very hard on myself. And so, inside of that practice, I also discovered a forgiveness and a recognition that there are, parents, we love our kids. We strive to give them every good and wonderful experience, to keep them safe, to raise them well. That is our intention. And nothing about that wasn't true that day. All of that was true that morning. I was up being the kind of mother that I wanted to be. I was having the kind of morning that I loved with my son. And I had no reason to believe that this morning would be any different than any other morning. And
Right.
that's when I started to recognize I I cannot control everything. And I was a loving mother the day before the accident. I was a loving mother the day of the accident, and I remain his loving mother 25 years later.
Mm.
That is my truth. That is what ultimately helped bring peace to my heart, is understanding that we all make decisions that have unintended consequences that we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen from moment to moment. If we did, we would, I'm sure we would all pick very different lives,
Mhm.
we would live differently. But since we don't, we do our best. We do
Mhm.
our best and we make the best decisions in moments. And we hope and we pray that we're making them and that everyone will stay safe. But accidents happen and this life doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I had to allow for that truth to also be a part of this healing journey. That sometimes we make decisions that have unintended consequences that we can't undo, but it doesn't mean that we should punish ourselves for the rest of our lives.
Thank you for sharing that. And I'm always kind of hesitant to bring that up because it's such a vulnerable place for people, that guilt that we hold. But I can tell you, after working with all the people that I've worked with, parents, spouses, etc., it's almost universal. We find some way to blame ourselves, regardless of the
Yeah.
circumstances of our loved ones passing. And as you said, we can't predict the outcome of everything that we do.
Okay.
On any other day, you would have gone to sleep and Drew would have been fine and been watching TV when you woke up. It just so happens that that was the circumstances of that day. But there, we do want to have this illusion of control. I think that's one of the reasons why people beat themselves up so badly, because we want to feel like if I made this decision, then this would have happened, and we never know that.
Right. I often hear I should have known. That's a very common
Yes.
I hear I should have known. I should have, or I did what I feel like I missed something. I should have done this, or I should have asked this question. And I think to myself, that's the invitation to the kind of circular discussion that leads us. We become spinning tops.
Right.
We're just spinning in place. We're not gaining any trajectory. And so I understood that that kind of thinking would anchor me to a past and to a line of questioning that would never have a satisfactory answer. And
Mhm.
I was going to have to make that decision that I would never have the answer I'm looking for. God was not going to write me a letter and say, I did this for this reason, and you don't know and you don't understand, but hold on, because someday it'll make sense. That wasn't coming. And so I had to decide that even though I didn't have answers and I didn't understand, that I still had choices. And those choices were going to either align me with a life of becoming better and allowing growth, or it was going to stifle me and I was going to become bitter and stuck. And I
Mhm.
knew that. I knew that in my gut, in my heart, I knew I had a choice to make. And I chose to embrace life the way Drew did, which was to live it boldly, to live it fully, to be curious about everything. And that's what shifted for me. I got very curious about what my life could become, even though I had lost my son, and what he and I could do together because I was bringing him with me.
Mhm. So and I know there's not a moment when that shift is made, but if how long do you think after did you start to make that shift that I'm not going to hold myself, responsible for this? Because I totally agree with you. It is a choice, and people here listen to this might think, well, no, it's not a choice, but it is.
It is. It
We
is a
get to
choice.
choose, and it's not easy. It's a hard road, but when did you start to kind of come out of that?
I would say it happened in increments, and then there
Hmm.
was maybe an epiphanal moment where I recognized that when I was in service to others, because immediately after the accident, I started talking about water safety education, and I went to preschools and I focused on the most vulnerable, which are youth under the age of 5, in
Wow.
particular boys. And in my community, there are over 200 miles of open irrigation canals that, run alongside many developments.
Hmm.
And as Yuma has grown, so has, people have gone, they purchased, like developers have purchased farmland and they're developing them into
Hmm.
communities. And I knew I had a unique opportunity to take my story and to bring it to the forefront and educate people about water safety from a very unique perspective, which was irrigation canal awareness.
Hmm.
And being in service was something that helped me understand that I could make a difference, even though it wasn't a difference that or I didn't feel like I necessarily would have chosen this, but I could still do good.
Hmm.
And Drew's life could still hold meaning and value if I could allow myself to to serve. And service is where I began to understand I had choices.
Okay.
I had some unique opportunities, and every single time I went to a preschool and I looked into the eyes of these beautiful children, and I would remember my son's, beautiful bright eyes. I knew I was doing something of value. I knew that those and trust me, I'm still in the same community that this accident occurred in. And every now and again, I'll bump into one of those children that I talked to 25 years ago that are now parents themselves.
Wow.
And they will say to me, I never forgot what you said. And they were 4 years old, 4 and 5 years old. I've
Hmm.
never forgotten. My kids, my kids are in swimming lessons, or, I remember writing an essay for the essay contest that you sponsored, and remembering Drew. And so Drew lives on in a way that I could never have predicted back then.
Right. Right.
And so again, that was the choice. And it begins with choices like that. Sometimes it starts off as service, but it eventually becomes an awareness that there are choices that we can make that help to bring more gratitude into our experience. And then we realize that grief and joy can coexist, that pain and beauty can coexist, but you have to allow that. And
Right.
that's the choice. You have to allow for that experience to culminate and germinate and then care for it, and it will bloom. I promise you, it will bloom. but it's an intentional thing and it's a practice. It's something we have to revisit and dedicate ourselves to in order to see its fullness.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful. And so beautifully said, because this concept that life is bigger than grief. It doesn't, there's this idea I think we talked about earlier with Freud's concept of like grief is something we want to get rid of. We want to get over. We want to move past it. It's a pathology. So, you how would you or how would you describe what your grief is like today versus what it was like in the early days?
So for a long time, grief felt like a punishment. It felt like a problem that needed to be solved. And what I've come to really understand is that grief is not a problem that we solve. Grief is the shadow side of love's brilliance.
Mm,
And grief is our soul's beckoning. It's calling us forward to attach and to hold on to the love that remains. Love is just like energy. It cannot be destroyed. But the more we focus on the pain, the more pain we'll experience. The more we focus on the love, the more love we will experience. And so I made the choice to align this experience with all of the love that I could just pull from all of those memories. And that is what grief is like for me. Grief is an experience that has led to some of the most profound growth in discoveries about who I am as a person, what's
mm.
important to me, what I value. It simplified my life in a way that I can't even begin to really put into words, but it made things very clear what was important and what wasn't anymore.
Yeah. One of the fears that people have when they lose someone is I'm going to forget them.
Mm.
And then I think sometimes people will actually hold on to the pain thinking, well, the only way I can bring them forward with me is to hold on to this pain. So did you ever experience that, like, what if I forget about Drew? Did you ever have that fear?
I did. I never wanted to forget anything. I wrote Drew a letter every day for the first year after his passing,
Mm,
and I wrote him a letter. Um, I call it my year of magical thinking, where he wasn't dead. He was just off on this adventure,
yeah.
this spiritual adventure where he couldn't send me a postcard, but I could write him letters. And he loved Peter Pan. He loved Peter Pan so much. So in my mind, he just became like a Peter Pan figure, a boy who would never grow up,
Yeah.
but would go on and live these wonderful adventures. And I would talk to him as though he were in Neverland, and I would write to him about the experiences. I remember one day in particular, Yuma is a very sunny place. We grow a lot of agriculture year round because we have great weather for that. So on a particularly rainy day, there was thunder and it was lightning, and I thought, I wonder if that's him up there just bowling, because Drew loved the crash of bowling pins, he loved all of that sound and just when he had plays with trucks, he would just the crashing sound he would make. And I thought, huh, I wonder if that's him up
Mhm.
there just letting me know he's having a good time. And so I just remember thinking about things like that. It was a present day experience that I was still going back and remembering how he lived. And
Mhm.
I would write about that. And so I found that even in my writing, I was connecting to him and I was not forgetting him at all. If anything, I was reinforcing all of those memories. And then I made decisions at Christmas time or at Thanksgiving that all I wanted was somebody to tell me something that they remembered about Drew. And I would just ask for memories. Just write me a memory. That's the only gift I want. Just give me the gift of your memory
Wow.
of him. And that was one of the most beautiful experiences. Maybe of my life to hear the love that other people had and have for him
Mhm.
in those tender moments, Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, graduations, all of it, because he was going to graduate his preschool class and go on to kindergarten that next year. Just his teachers wrote to me and his classmates' parents wrote to me. And it was such a beautiful way of recognizing just how impactful his brief 4.5 years of life were, but how meaningful.
Yeah.
his life was to others and to me. And that's how I held on to him. And I just go back and I revisit them. I have all of them and I just keep them in a box. And every Christmas they come out, or every Thanksgiving we'll add, something that we're grateful for. And Drew's always included.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And for people, we're recording this on video for people that listen to the podcast. I love the way your face lights up when you talk about Drew. And I think it's really important for people, again, having that fear early on, thinking, oh, what if I forget it? And I remember thinking that, I don't want Shayna to fade into my memory. I thought, and again, it's been 10 years and she hasn't faded at all and never will. So I wanted to
Exactly.
alleviate
Yeah.
that fear for people that might have that.
I think it's really important for people who have I guess a longer period of time inside of this journey to really speak to people at the beginning phases, because there is a lot of fear and there
Hmm.
is a lot of confusion. And I know that you cannot give them all the answers. I cannot give them all the answers, but we can give them our wisdom and we can share with them the insights and the things that help us to stay connected and to dispel some of those fears, because they will never forget their loved one. They won't, that's impossible. I understand it's a concern that we all go through,
Hmm.
but write it down, preserve it. We have phones everywhere. Audio record yourself, remembering something, have
Hmm.
it transcribed, put it into a book, you know, just ask people for their memories and bring it all together in one place. And then, experience that over time. It's amazing how much you'll remember. And sometimes it'll jog other memories,
Yeah.
and write them down. Just write it down, preserve it for sure.
And for me, I actually made a shift where it's like, again, we talked about like they're still here. We're going to see them again, or we're going to see them again. I still have a relationship with Shayna. I still talk to her every day. So
Yeah.
that's I'm not going to forget her because I talk to her every day.
That's one thing that I really love that you shared that, because it's one of my mainstays. I've never not spoken to Drew. I swear to you, I feel a connection to him outside. I go outside and I really feel that's where I talk to Drew.
Hmm.
I talk to him about the hummingbirds that come into the yard, or I talk to him about the flowers that I planted, because he loved gardening. Sunflowers were one of his favorite flowers. And I just remember, and I talk to him about the things I'm doing. And I've said several times, this is Drew's life and my journey after this. That's what this book is. And so we
Hmm.
even did that together.
Yeah.
So his
Yeah.
voice is all through this book, and my memory of him is all through this book. And those conversations continue on, I promise you. I talk to him all the time.
Yeah, I think that's great, and at least it works for me,
It
So like I
works for
said,
me
that
too.
that fear that I had that I was going to forget Shayna is like, well, and her pictures are all over the place. You see the picture on the wall behind me.
Yeah,
It's all my Apple Watch. I've got her picture on. That's every time I look at it, and we can keep our loved ones' memories alive in our heart. We can keep them here in our heart, and with all the research that you've done and all the research that I've done, I know that my daughter is still with me in a very real
absolutely.
way.
Absolutely. And I love that you do know that. And my heart, like I have a lot of empathy for people that are not quite there, that really wrestle with that question. My faith has definitely been foundational in this evolution, but I did have to work for that. My relationship with God definitely did. I struggled with God for a time. But I've come to understand that Drew is infinite. Drew's love is infinite and everlasting. And I love that knowledge, because it allows me to live in this life knowing full well that he is here with me,
Hmm.
and that I will be in that same sphere, realm, heaven, whatever, at some point. And what a beautiful reunion that will be.
Yeah,
But I live this life fully because that's how I know he would have lived it.
yeah. That's such an important point. And you mentioned you had some faith background before, you and your husband, and then you with the Catholicism and Mormonism and stuff, Seventh Day Adventist. But for a lot of times when we lose someone, especially a child, it's like it's not enough. Now I need to know. So when
Mhm.
I tell people that, they say, Brian, do you really believe this? I'm like, I don't really like to use the word believe. It's like, do I believe in gravity? Do I believe in, the internet? It's like there's so much evidence, and you've had
Yeah.
experiences. You said if you do Reiki,
Yeah.
there's energy that these things are real.
Yes, and back before I really relied on my faith, I really dove into science. And there
Hmm.
was a book by David Hawking, Dr. David Hawking, called Power versus Force, and it is the study of, or his study of the map of consciousness. And I really I just looked for evidence of connection and what emotions are, and what does that mean and how does it impact our bodies and how does that impact our thinking and our connection to our loved ones. I read Joe Didion, The Year of Magical Thinking. And then I went on to read other authors who talked about grief, and Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. I looked in places like that
Hmm.
before I really came to understand that what I was searching for in science, it gave me a lot of facts and very, studies. But when I turned to my faith, that is where I felt a peace that I really could not understand. It surpassed, like, that peace that could wash over my pain and truly give me an internal tranquility and that sense of deep connection, that connection that is not about physical form. It's about spiritual soul connection. That's where I found him. And that's where I remain today. My faith practice is my own. I have my own relationship with God that doesn't necessarily fit a religious box, but
Hmm.
it is very real. It is very vibrant, and and I cherish it.
That's awesome. So, Melissa, with the launch of your book today,
Yes.
what are you hoping to see your book do?
My book was written with the intention of being that letter that I once received from Teresa. This book was written for the person who needs a Teresa today. It was written to let somebody know that they are not only seen, but they are held and they are cared for. And then ultimately, I hope to inspire them to also make that choice to look for the path that allows them to create a life alongside of this experience, but to still build towards a life of joy and fulfillment and meaning. Because I'm living proof that it is possible. It is possible. And I want my example to just be that glimmer of hope for that person who's really struggling the way I was that day when I received that letter, and be that thread of hope that will carry them through to their journey. 25 years later, who knows, maybe they'll be the one to write the next book, or they'll be the one to create a new foundation that supports other grievers. I just believe in the ripple effect of putting more love out into the world, more hope out into the world, and I want to see those ripples of change and that intention carried through. I hope that dear Drew, reaches every person that it can benefit.
Yeah, I think it's awesome, and you're definitely, you're doing that, and you've walked the talk. You've given us example of what we can do, and as you said, I love the way you're not sugarcoating things. You're not saying this was an easy thing, and that's an important part of it too, because I think for people to realize it's possible, they've got to know that you were where they were, that you didn't just wake
Oh,
up like this.
absolutely.
You.
No,
Yeah.
no. It was messy. Let's just be honest. It can be messy at times, but mess can still become masterpiece.
Yeah.
And whenever I get really, when I remember when I would get really discouraged and really concerned about, is this even working? Is all this, practice and all, is it working? And I remember having this very vivid kind of, I'll call it a daydream, but I was shown all of these shards of glass, all of these broken, colorful pieces of glass, which is how I felt. I felt shattered. I felt scattered. And then I saw this image of a kaleidoscope, and I thought, oh, I get it now. All of these fragments, all of these things that have made me feel like I've lost myself or that I'm no longer this whole and complete person, when you put them together and then you put them in a tube and then you put light through it, what you see is magnificent.
Hmm.
And we don't know that until we've journeyed down this path of grief. We don't know that all that broken glass, all of that brokenness will someday become something so beautiful that we will want to share that beauty with everyone who is now on that same journey we were, because we now want to give from that overflow. And that's what this book really is. It's my ability today to give from this wellspring of joy that is not fabricated. This was earned. This was intentional.
Right.
This is a practice. This is just like going to the gym in working on my physical body. I worked on my heart.
Hmm.
I allowed my heart's voice to become louder than the pain, to offer me more vision for a future than the pain did. And inside of my heart's voice, that's where all the beauty really arrived.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize the point you just made because I was talking with a client the other day, and we were talking about some shifts that she has made and some insights she's had, and she said something like, "Well, I was really blessed to have this," I said, "No, this is actually an intentional choice that you made. You get to choose how you feel about things. There's a set of events that happen. There's an objective set of events, and then there's the story that we tell ourselves around that.
Absolutely.
So you've chosen." To do this. You've chosen to make these decisions, that you've chosen to look at it this way. You have gone through the pain of going through the practice. It's not like it just happens. Like we have a grief event and we grow. There
Mhm.
it provides us the opportunity to grow, but it doesn't just necessarily generate growth.
I always say you can be a gardener, but until you plant the seed in the ground and you water it and you tend to it, you're not, you have the intention of being a gardener. But
Hmm.
until you actually garden, that's when you actually become the gardener. You have to plant these ideas and understand that they need time to germinate. They need
Hmm.
sunlight. They need water. They need the right conditions, the right time of year. There are conditions in seasons inside of grief that we will have to weather,
Yeah,
but the intention to continue on is the point, because the blooms will eventually blossom. They will emerge, but you have to make sure that you're taking care to care for those intentions, and those practices eventually give way into not just knowledge but embodiment, and then it becomes a way of being when
yeah,
you to master it and embody it and to make that choice so routinely that this is the effect. It's the default.
yeah,
It's not that I have to think about this, and it's I wake up in this state. And when I'm not in this state, that's now the abnormal. When I don't feel this deep connection to Drew and to loving life, that's when I know, okay, well, what's off? And I go and I do the check-ins, and I still all of those practices that I started with my grief journey, they sustain me today in just different ways.
yeah. Awesome, awesome. So, is there anything that you would like to talk about that I didn't ask you about?
Um, I am a very big advocate for water safety education,
Hmm.
and I really truly believe that it's not just a seasonal conversation, it's a year-round discussion. It is the number one cause of death for children under the age of 5 in accidental deaths.
Hmm.
And so I hope that everybody will take time to look at their surroundings, especially if you're vacationing and going to new places. Make sure that you're paying attention to things like decorative fountains, open water systems, lakes, streams. It does not take much water and it does not take much time for a drowning to occur.
Hmm.
So, if anybody would like free resources about water safety education, my website, I offer those resources free, and there's videos and conversation starters for parents to have with their children about making them more safe and educated about water safety and drowning prevention. And my website is melissahall.com.
Okay. MelissaHull.com. That'll be in the show notes also. Remind people of the name of your book.
It's Dear Drew, Creating a Life Bigger Than Grief, and it is available today.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to offer this book to the world.
Yeah, I know Drew is very proud of you and the work you've done on yourself and what you're doing in the world and putting this out there and continuing his legacy, even these many years later. So, Melissa, thanks for being here today. It's good to meet you.
Good to meet you, and thank you so much for having me today.
All right, have a great afternoon.